Now I'd like to ask Achala Abeysinghe, head of the ECB training and support program, to tell us about a proposal for an international air passenger adaptation levy. Okay.
Thank you. That's it. How do I go back?
I'm sure. Okay, I'll do it again. I'd like to invite now Ms. Achala Abeysinghe, Senior Strategic Advisor to the LDC Group and Head of the ECBI Training and Support Program, to tell us about International Air Passenger Adaptation Levy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon to you all. Nice to be here, and thank you, Benito, for organizing also PCCB for this very important work. Where I would like to start is from where Benito actually stopped. That we need, if we are serious about this whole conversation and addressing climate change and supporting developing countries on their actions on the ground, we need to go beyond the public finance conversation that we are having. It's not to replace, but to increase the resources for developing countries. The whole last week in the negotiating rooms, in the other part of this conference center, we have been discussing the climate finance resources, the need for climate finance resources to be sustainable, predictable, new and additional, adequate, and equitable as well. It's not only last week, for last 26 years we have been discussing this, and we are still in that conversation, and we need to move forward. So with that remark, I would like to give a very brief presentation on the International Air Passenger Adaptation Levy, which was a concept that was developed few years ago, but perhaps this is the time to bring that conversation back so that we can see if there is a possibility to actually take this forward, and hence this conversation today. I must recognize my colleague Muyeye Chamvera, who initially worked on this concept with Benito to develop the concept. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here, but he added a very valuable contribution to this concept as well as the presentation. So the concept initially was called International Air Travel Adaptation Levy, was introduced in 2006 with Benito and Cameron Hepburn, and then that concept was taken forward by the Least Developed Countries Group when Maldives was chairing the LDC group in 2008, and we submitted a proposal submission to the UNFCCC, and it was renamed as International Air Passenger Adaptation Levy, so IAPAL. And this is another briefing that Benito did with focusing on that proposal. The proposition of this fund is that it's to be a solidarity levy on all international air passengers, and particularly focusing on supporting adaptation in developing countries. And how the levy would be generated, funds will be generated, is will be differentiated based on the class of travel, and hence reflecting different capabilities of individual passengers. And to determine the size of the levy, we work around a similar levy that we identified called French Solidarity Levy, and based on that, the scenarios of this levy, we proposed charging a economy class passenger $6 and a business or first class passenger $62. And the revenue base, the research finds that the airline industry handles average 760 million international passengers a year, and IATA forecast annual passenger number growth of 5.1 annually, as I mentioned. The scale of and quality of the fund is based on those the revenue base that we recognize through the French Solidarity Levy, and here are the numbers. Economy class 3.9 billion US dollars, and higher class 3.9 billion US dollars in the first year, and when you go to the sixth year, it could go up to 10 billion US dollars. And addressing those concerns that developing countries have, that the climate finance needs to be new and additional, predictable, appropriate, equitable, and adequate, we think that this proposal can address some of those concerns. Particularly, it's new and additional because we are introducing a new levy, and it goes beyond the budgetary contributions of countries. It is predictable because we do have the numbers coming from the airline industry. Appropriate because we are all the air passengers are contributing to the climate change problem through their travel at individual level, and it is also equitable because we are proposing the funds raised through this proposal going to developing countries for adaptation. Adequacy, obviously, that's a relative understanding. It's 8 to 10 billion US dollars a year, but considering what we have in the GCF right now, as well as the lack of funding in the least developed countries fund and all the other multilateral funding, this is a considerable amount. In terms of operational options, we are proposing the revenues to go to financial mechanism of the Paris Agreement, so either GCF or the both operating entities, so either GCF or JEF managed funds. And in keeping with the principle of CBDR, the levy could also be collected domestically, for example, through national funding entities, and can be used for domestic adaptation priorities and needs, and hence avoiding no-net incidents to developing countries. To deal with the airlines, whatever the funding, the fund is that's going to get the funding can compensate airlines for the reasonable administrative cost. Could be adaptation fund, it could be green climate fund, it could be JEF, for example. There was a huge conversation around this proposal when we submitted it to the UNFCCC from the countries who rely a lot on tourism for in their economies. And when we did research on that, we found that economy travel is more sensitive to price increases than the premium travel, but there is no large implication on that. For example, $6 levy on $750 ticket will result in only 0.5% drop in demand for long haul and short haul international travel respectively. So it's 0.447 or 0.52 depending on whether it's a short haul or long haul. And we also found that benefits going to developing countries through adaptation revenue is actually considerably larger than expected tourism impacts. Potential impact on airlines, the funds will be collected from individuals, so the levy is borne directly by the passengers, not by the airline. And the only impact on airline is reduced demand, as mentioned above. And but however, the the demand being low is not that drastic considering the benefits that we get from it. Unfair distortions on competition in industry can be avoided by universal application of the levy on international travel. So it will not be selective by regions, routes, countries or airlines. So this is my last slide to say that this levy represents a significant additional contribution to adaptation funds. There are which are critical for the poorest in the world. Revenues are consistent, predictable, and not dependent on annual reviews by the government because it's not budgetary contributions, as I mentioned before, and potential negative impacts are much less than the benefits. Poor countries can benefit from this more than losing with the proposal. So that's the end of the slides. The reason why we presented here is to get inputs from you and reaction to it and see if we can actually take this proposal forward to the next stage. And we haven't done very recent research on this. It's, as I presented at the beginning, it's done a few years ago, so depending on your inputs, we would be very happy to see how we can take it forward. Thank you.